Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. Welcome everyone to this super special episode of Fintech Chatter. We're here from the UK British Consul. I'm joined by two guests, one who I know reasonably well, Mark Ledsham from Currency Cloud, and Matt Tyrrell from Codat. So thanks for joining us, chaps. We're here to talk about, I guess, the challenges and the opportunities of launching a fintech in Australia. And I know that both of you have got some, kind of incredible experience of scaling, launching. Mark, you've taken a business through to IPO, so just some incredible insights. But also, I guess, you've both kind of experienced both sides of the water, so the UK and Australia, and the nuances that come between the two markets. So maybe, Mark, if you could introduce yourself to everybody and a little bit about your background as well.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm currently with Currency Cloud. I've been with them just over a year now as their Chief Operating Officer. Prior to that, I've got about 15 years experience in the fintech market, with a good portion of that here in Australia. So previously I was CFO at OFX, an international payment business here in Australia. As Dexter said, we took that through from around about, I think it was 60 employees when you found me for that. And we took that through to IPO. And then post that, I was Chief Revenue Officer and then CEO at XE, HFX, another international payment business. So deeply rooted in the international payment business.
Matt?
So yeah, I'm commercial director for APAC for Codat. So my role is basically we launched Codat a year ago down here. It's a UK headquartered and founded business. We've got about 350 people globally across London, New York, and Sydney now. So we've built the team to about 7 people down here. And Codat, for those who don't know, Codat's a universal API for SME business data. So we work with banks and fintechs to help build products that use data for their SME customers.
Awesome. Now, I guess the first question that I've got is for you, Matt. You've launched and you've exited a fintech in Australia. What has been different this time round, kind of launching a landing and expanding in Oz? What have been the key differences for you?
So, my startup was very much a different stage than Codat. Codat is we just recently raised our Series C round. So, JP Morgan, Plaid, Shopify came in on that round. PayPal, Amex are already on our cap table as well. So having that backing obviously makes life a lot easier, but still there's a lot of different challenges. There's always challenges starting a business in a new region, that's for sure.
Now, Mark, you mentioned there taking OFX through to IPO and a pretty early stage startup. It's probably fintech wasn't a word when you were there.
Yeah, I used to say that about OFX in that, when we were looking at IPOing, there was a lot of talk about fintech, and it definitely didn't exist at the time when we started. So they're kind of one of the granddaddies of.
So what's been the biggest difference for you, kind of straddling between Australia and the UK? What have been the key differences that you've noticed?
Yeah, I've done it both ways now. So obviously at Currency Cloud, we're so OFX was much more of a retail business. Currency Cloud were much more B2B, B2B to X. So, we basically take the economic barriers of international payments being licensed platform and banking network, and we package those up behind a simple API to give people speed to market. But when you talk about the differences between the markets, it's probably easier to talk about the similarities, actually. Right. Both English language speaking, populations that are very lean into digital, really want digital experiences. progressive regulators that really try to encourage competition. Fundamentally good places to do business, similar legal infrastructure as well. So I think, if anything, it's almost a very good step off for any company that's either in the UK or in Australia to go to either of those places to really take their next step on the journey as well. Okay. I think one of the key differences though would definitely be about the size of the opportunity. Bigger population just means there's more money. So, but they're both on the doorstep of two huge markets, being Europe generally or Asia. Yeah. So.
We'll talk about that in a little bit, because I think it's probably the way that Australia is positioning itself to the fintech world. But Matt, when Codat came to you and said, "Hey, we're going to launch in Australia," what was your immediate thought and response? Was it something that you were enthusiastic about, or were you maybe a little bit kind of dubious?
Yeah, super excited. I mean, I think I was living in London at the time, working in payments in a similar space to Mark, and the ability to come back here and start a business and start a new office for, what was a really exciting new business, and still is, obviously, with it was an amazing opportunity to build a team and also sort of, take some of the learnings I had from the UK and working in the market over there back to Australia.
From a currency cloud perspective, Mark, what is it that's kind of attracted Australia?
Look, again, it's from our perspective, we started out from the UK and we were operating on a global basis from a UK license, something that you can do when you're working with other regulated entities. And so we already had customers down here. So we saw the size of the opportunity. I think one of the key components for us is, particularly in the payment space, it is inherently a high risk operation. And I'm sure as much working with the fintech space, the banks haven't necessarily been as receptive as they could be to it. And so from our perspective, we just see it as a great opportunity to come down here and actually become an enabler to a broader ecosystem of fintechs, and give those opportunities to the population in Australia to really start to experience the kind of market that the UK has already, because it's had a slightly more progressive banking and regulatory environment for a bit longer.
It's a really interesting point that you make, because having been here in the Australian fintech scene since the early days, to see this evolution now where the ecosystem is creating the opportunities, for businesses like yourself. Yeah. Whereas previously it was just, how do we take on the big banks?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think from like you say, from my perspective, actually, we were listening to something a little bit earlier about how incumbents are now being seen as the competition, the new entrants are being seen as the competition as opposed to just the incumbents. Yeah. And like I said, being able to come down and help enable that for people and back their opportunities is a really exciting.
Now, Matt, we talked about, I guess, some of the challenges and the size of the market. From your side, what do you see as the bigger opportunities at the B2B space, B2C, B2B2C?
So, I mean, we work with fintechs and banks, so we don't actually ever face SMEs. I guess that's an important distinction. So we sit as an integration layer, a technical integration layer between our customers and their customers. So B2B payments is obviously is a huge opportunity and a sector that we're working in. But yeah, B2B is primarily where we play.
Cool. Now that I think one of the big challenges that we've seen for businesses is, what is the best route to kind of make that first move? Do you kind of come and land in a blaze of glory and invest lots of money, or do you do it off the back of getting that first customer? And if so, how do you get that first customer? What was your approach that you took to kind of getting Codat off the ground in Australia?
So when I started, a year ago here, we already had probably, a dozen customers. And then I came in at the same time that we were finishing up an RFP with Judo Bank, and which we subsequently won. I think one of the key reasons why we did win was because we actually invested down here, and as part of the actual contract we negotiated was that they would actually have technical support down here. So, we're committed, and the Codat's invested in having support, and we're starting to see that more and more now that our customers really value the fact that we do have local representation, especially when you've got a pretty technical product that the customers just don't want to. If you're dealing with a bank, they don't want to have to wait for 15 hours to get an answer, right? So they want it right now.
So I guess building that local support team has inherent challenges as well. How did you go about that
in terms of finding talent? Yeah, it was super difficult. I mean, when a year ago it was a completely different situation than it was now, right? I think we're in lockdowns and migration on hold. I think the market was very much as like a candidate sort of market. We were competing with likes of Salesforce and now getting bid on just junior sales roles, crazy numbers. But that has definitely changed now, I think. I feel like also raising our Series C added a lot more in terms of our profile. I think it de-risked it for a lot of more senior people as well. So we're starting to get a lot more.
Yeah. I've got to say as well, I think there was like this perfect storm of conditions which heavily weighted it towards candidates, which was, we've seen with COVID, I think pretty much every organization go digital overnight, which meant that there was a huge demand for digital talent, compounded then by huge investment. I mean, we've seen Series A rounds go from around about 10 million here in Oz to around about 40 million. So all of a sudden there was this huge money and a huge expectation that you're going to start to scale these startups. I think one of the benefits of getting through this period now, though, is that Australia's got a much stronger talent pool of fintech-ready talent who can actually scale businesses and can operate in startups, which I couldn't necessarily say was the case maybe it's 2019. Now, Mark, you guys have got operations in Singapore as well. Going back to Matt's earlier point about having the kind of support teams and the operations on the ground, is that something that you've found has been critical as well? Have you been able to manage that from Singapore?
Yeah, so from our perspective, what we've tried to do is be a bit more selective about what talent needs to be on the ground necessarily. We've taken an approach of a bit of a hybrid approach, actually. We just have a 24-hour operation out of the UK for some of the, let's call it lighter touch roles, where it's probably the first line customer support, that kind of thing. But then coming down to something where you need a bit more kind of probably a higher level of skill and more engagement, then we put those either in region in Singapore or we're putting them on the ground here in Australia as well. So we do have open positions at the moment. Our country manager, Nick Briscoe, he's busy trying to look for talent. So from that aspect, like I say, it's really dependent on the role and the level of kind of either local knowledge or kind of breadth of experience that's required. What I would say, though, kind of jumping a little bit on the on the challenges of hiring people, I think the that kind of the fact we had to go through the pandemic has made those kind of first steps of how you hire people in a country a bit easier, because you had to hire everyone remotely, right? So, I think that change has made it slightly easier to think about how you hire people.
Yeah, it used to be flights and having to fly people out to the UK, go and interview with head office. So that has definitely changed things. You mentioned Nick before, and that the country manager, Matt, country manager. I like to call this the Neil Armstrong position, first person on the moon. It is a bit like finding a blue-eyed unicorn, very, very unique skills, behaviors, attitude that's required to make that role a success. What have been the things that you've kind of taken from this experience and thought, look, if you're kind of going to bottle this up and sell it the things that are required in that person to make it work?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, like having someone having experience across startup and a large technology business, that they are really two different things. I think, working at a startup or an early stage business, you sort of just have the ability to be a little bit more scrappy and just get involved with different things, and sort of just that mentality of we'll just make it work if we just work harder. Whereas, with, having people from and interviewing people from large organizations and large technology businesses, they've got everything. They've got the resources on a silver platter, and it just sort of makes it easier, right? So it's just trying to get a good combination of experience, but also someone who's going to walk, that you can trust and who's going to walk.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the time difference does make a difference as well. Because I don't know about you, but I'm on client calls at 8 p.m. on a Friday night, 6 a.m. on a Monday, 4 a.m. on a Monday, 5 a.m. on a Tuesday. It's difficult to kind of manage that, particularly if you've got a multinational business like yourself, Mark. What have been some of the things that you've found from an operational perspective have helped in managing those time zone differences?
Again, I think some of the key components there, it has been that drive to being digital anyway. From the outbreak of the pandemic, things becoming much more, working from home, remote has meant, because Currency Cloud ourselves are a remote first business now, even post pandemic. So I think that flexibility of being, being able to work from home and be a bit more flexible with the hours has been helpful. I think, and it comes into it as well, as I was saying earlier, the cherry picking what resources need to be on the ground versus what can be locally and, kind of managed globally 24/7 from the UK operations side of things. So I think that's, those have been the things really where that helped it.
I'm going to ask this question of both of you because I think you've both got what I would say is a distinct advantage, which is previous experience of this market does have some nuance. You reflected on it earlier about some of the challenges of working with the big four banks. I oftentimes think that when people look at the size of the Australian opportunity, they look at the size of the map versus the size of the population, and kind of they're often left disappointed, and some have been unsuccessful because of, I guess, an over expectation of what is possible here and where the opportunities actually lie. From that perspective of being able to derive those insights, get access to those insights, what would be your advice to those that were looking to launch here? Is it to go and hire local experience, local talent, or leverage bodies like Fintech Australia, like UK DIT?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it would definitely be make sure you get out there and do your research first, right? It's very easy to get overexcited in a startup environment and think, let's run through walls, as Matt was saying earlier. So from my perspective, it would be go out, get on the ground, do a bit of on-ground research, connect with the likes of DIT and Fintech Australia, and get connections with people who are already in the market and try and understand those nuances. I think talking about the size of the market as well, it's really interesting as you start to scale as a business, that Australia, while it's got a small population, is actually a really good test bed for what things do work in a market, particularly in similar markets as well. So I like PayPal's approach there. They often use Australia as their little test bed for whether a product's going to work. So once you're in on the ground, kind of taking it as a market to test and see how things go is a good way to go as well.
And Matt, from your side, what would be your thoughts? Does it require that kind of local expertise, or do you think you can kind of ship somebody over from head office and let them kind of first boots on the ground? And
so if I had my time again, so we've struggled to find good salespeople, technical salespeople, as well as pre-sales. We've now actually we were struggling so much, we brought some people down, 2 junior guys on secondment, and now we're currently trying to relocate them down here permanently by giving them an Airbnb at North Bondi. So we're in that process. If I had my time again, I probably would have started that process at the very beginning, because I think having people from your UK office or whatever head office to come down and seed information rather than just trying to find out yourself. There's a lot of value in that, and also just sort of helping to build a bit of a culture. Yeah. I think, talking about like late nights, it was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday was pretty much, 7 o'clock at night till 10 p.m., every night, just trying to catch up and trying to get as much knowledge as I could in the UK. Yeah. When I was down here by myself anyway.
Yeah, I think Mark makes a really good point there. I think, that question is maybe it's not one way or the other. Maybe you need both. Yeah. Because the cultural aspect of what you're trying to build is, as an overall global organization, is super important. But then getting access to local knowledge from people who are local as well is something that's is super key. So maybe it's a combination of both if you can afford it.
Yeah. I think also just the tyranny of distance. Australia always is like very much a satellite office, and time zones. If you ever have to try and get someone from London, Sydney, and New York on a call,
you can pretty much
guarantee you're going to be the one who's going to be up early or late night. So building a culture and a really strong team unit down here that's autonomous and works well as a team is super. And that's something our founders have always been really conscious of.
Now, obviously, since the pandemic, we've kind of shifted to probably the biggest debate I've ever seen in the quarter of a century I've been hiring, which is work from home, remote work. More and more I'm hearing from business leaders, and certainly over the last 2 years, the difficulties of creating a culture and a business where everybody's dispersed and working from their bedrooms. From your perspective, Matt, if you had to do that, weren't able to get people together in a room, do you think Codat would have got the traction that it had as early as it did?
As in the UK or in Australia?
No, it's here in Oz.
In Oz. I mean, listen, I think, I was pretty consciously trying to get into the office with the UK guys, came down on secondment. They were coming into the office. We're a sale. We've got a strong sales culture, and we're in enterprise sales. If you're in enterprise sales, you need to sort of create that sort of buzz and be able to share information. And there's really no easy way to do that than being, in the same office, listening to other people.
That's a lovely kind of segue into the next bit that I wanted to talk about, which is, I think, more around the nuance of Australia and its geography and its cities and kind of the skill sets that are available in those cities. And I think Ryan touched on it earlier, where we've seen probably a big push in crypto come from Brisbane, Queensland. But if you look traditionally, Melbourne, Sydney, which are going to be your two kind of main areas, Sydney very banking, financial services focused. We're going to talk from a fintech perspective. You've got Revolut, Square, Stripe, all in Melbourne. The kind of tech, the SaaS style, kind of heavy tech, fintech tends to be dominating in Melbourne. Were they kind of considerations for you when you look to launch Currency Cloud and Codat as to, what type of business model you were, where your customers were going to be, and kind of where you were going to have access to talent?
To be honest with you, I don't think it was too much of a consideration, other than I was in London and I was coming back home to Sydney, and I live in Manly. So it was like, this is where the office is going to be, right?
Yeah.
No. And I think, they're equally, there's strong cities, there's pros and cons. And I think, like, in terms of the banking sector in particular, there's, it's pretty equally weighted, right? Like, I think, there's a pretty good mix of businesses in both cities. You can't really go wrong, and it's only 45 minutes an hour on the plane anyway. as we all know, going to Melbourne tomorrow.
Yeah. And from your side, Mark?
Look, from our side, like I said earlier, we're remote first.
Yeah.
So location doesn't really matter. If you look at our UK office, globally we've got nearly 600 people now, with around about 500 of those being in the UK. And you go into the office any day, there's only about 50 people in there, and the rest of the employees are all over, from Cardiff to Edinburgh to so all over the place. So being down here, I don't think the geographic side isn't too much of an issue, because they can be anywhere. We can pick up. It does really open your talent pool. It does mean that you don't get to benefit from lower cost jurisdictions, because everyone's in the same basis, right? So, but what we do try and do is make sure we get the teams together regularly, though. So you get them in, you do team building events, working, because you've got to make sure that you can maintain that culture. And actually, the way we do that predominantly is by making sure that we invest a lot of time in the interview process up front. I think when I came on board, I had 13 interviews of at least an hour each. So, they were, and even, kind of as you move down the organization, you're still talking at least 6 interviews to make sure that you really get that culture right. You don't always get it right. You sometimes get some wrong, but just investing that time up front to try and pick up on values is the key aspect that we do. And as Matt said, there's, within the banking space, within financial services, most people in fintech came out of the banks. Now, you're not going to find, everyone who's suitable. Not everyone in a bank is going to be suitable for a fintech, but there's still talent to be had in those where they're fed up of, their ideas not going places, or it being too slow and too bureaucratic. There's plenty of those people that are ready to make the move.
Yeah. I guess one of the other challenges, certainly I see this a lot, is employee brand. And if you're coming out from the UK, I've even had this challenge with Revolut that I thought it would have been, wow, Revolut, and most people were saying, who are these guys? I've never heard of them before, which I couldn't understand or believe. But look, I think it is a challenge for anybody who's coming out that's not a really well-known brand like a Stripe, to with it being a difficult talent pool like it is everywhere else. What have been some of the things that Currency Cloud have done to kind of elevate their brand to the Aussie market?
There's been a lot of work that we've done just around LinkedIn generally, kind of building brand on there, getting connections. We're in a slightly luckier place. I'm sure you're aware, at the start of this year, it closed a transaction where Visa bought us. So it's that validation that comes from a big global brand like that, putting them, stumping up $1 billion to buy you is good validation and helps to build brand as well. So, but without that, it would definitely be around, getting your name out there on LinkedIn, building presence from an employee brand recognition on there.
You had a probably different challenge, Matt, in that you kind of didn't have that Visa connection there. It's, educating the market around who you are. And you mentioned earlier, competing against businesses like Salesforce, who, pretty much everybody knows. How did you go about building that brand and starting to kind of get credibility out there in the market that you then become a place where talented people want to come?
Yeah, I mean, we hired a really good PR agency, and if anyone wants a referral into them, it definitely really helped. They spent a lot of time just taking a lot of the more technical white papers that we'd developed in house and sort of pitching those to the media, and I think that's definitely helped. And I think again off the Series C, we suddenly got a lot more. There was awareness of what we're doing. I think being involved with Fintech Australia is definitely worthwhile if you're looking to come out as well. And then also hiring a good recruiter actually is something that we struggled with a few people, and then
there's not that many good ones around.
There isn't. It's you got to find some good people that can represent you and sort of really sell the business for you and the opportunity.
Now, I guess from an advice perspective, Mark, if you were giving guidance to anybody coming out here to launch, or you were launching your own business here in Oz, what would be the first things that you'd want to get right?
Definitely those first handful of employees. I think they're really the ones that set the tone for the culture of the organization and the energy that it has. So that would definitely be the first thing. I think the second thing is just really making sure that you've got product market fit, making sure you've got those fundamentals available, and that you can hit the ground running. I think a lot of organizations think they can, and I come from a place where I've been burnt at this, right? So you think that you've got a great product, and you do in that market, but you pick it up and move it to another market, and there's nuances and it doesn't quite work. A very good example is picking up international payments that work here, well, most places in the world, and taking them to the US.
Yeah.
It's a different beast, and it doesn't work, and you lose a lot of money very quickly. So yeah, just making sure that you really understand, you've thought about those nuances, how you're going to address them, what they are, and that those first employees on the ground, the ones that set the energy, are super curious and empowered, and will tell you what those problems are, why it's not working, and help you change it quickly. Because you are going to have to move and change and be dynamic in that process, because you're learning something new every day.
And it works the other way around as well. I think 2 high-profile digital banks, neobanks in Volt and Zinja, took the Monzo Revolut model, stalling model, tried to apply it to Australia, and unfortunately it's not worked.
Well, I think it's a really interesting piece, that, and I think that's about making sure that you've got, I've got a view that you've got to be an order of magnitude better than what you're replacing to have a right to exist. Okay. And I've thought about that. Why didn't the neobanks work down here? Well, in the UK, which is where the genesis of neobanks was, the banks were on slow, old tech stacks. And what the neobanks bought was a new customer experience and a new stack that they could iterate and build quickly on. And so the banks there couldn't catch up and couldn't move quick enough. I think down here, the big four had the opportunity to go, oh, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
Spend a little bit of time getting their apps right. And they couldn't move quickly, but they had enough time to get the apps there, so that when the neobanks here came and all they were really bringing was that UX and that experience, there wasn't enough reason for clients to jump. So they didn't have that strong enough USP that made people go, I want to be with them. And then they were gaining customers by giving away, revenue with high interest deposits, and didn't have a lending book on the back of it. So, making sure that looking at that product and saying, have we got a sustainable business model here? And can we make it work? And can we get to critical mass so we can then make it work? So for sure.
One of the, I guess, best use cases and examples of a successful digital bank, Judo. I guess, first of all, how importantly is it to get that first customer before committing to come out to Australia? And second of all, what is it that you think Judo have done really well?
I mean, we had, Judo wasn't our first customer down here. We probably had about a dozen, those smaller sort of digital lenders and vertical SaaS businesses that we're working with. But they were our first sort of major foundation customer that really meant that we could invest and put boots on the ground. In terms of where, with Judo, what they've done really well, I mean, I think they're obviously reporting season, and they reported that they are a lot more efficient than a lot of the other banks, and they're using where they don't have, legacy tech issues to deal with. Their cost to income ratio is lower. So they're becoming a lot more efficient, and a lot of that is off the back of using technology like Codat and Encino, who's one of our partners.
Mm. And I guess they've taken that SME market and been very, very clear about who they serve and who they help, which I think is part of the genius of it, right? Is that it was just being very, very specific.
Yeah, and they started by building almost what effectively is a sales team, and then now they're backing that up with the investment in technology versus maybe some other Other businesses would have done it the other way around. So they've invested really heavily in tech without actually having the customers or the salespeople that can go and build it. And that's always going to be higher risk, right?
As an enterprise software business, have you had much to do with the regulators? Has that been something you've had to?
No, we don't. We're not licensed. We don't need to be. We sit as a technical service provider or an OSP, an integration layer between our customers for the banks who need to be regulated and their customers. So thank God it's not something.
So that's something that's kind of enabled you to be real stealthy when you've come in.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Right. And what about Currency Cloud? Have you had? I'm assuming by the smile, yes.
Yeah, look, it's part and parcel of doing international payments, right? And actually, as I said, it's one of the things we do really well, which is packaging up what you need, license, platform, and network, and sitting it behind APIs and giving people speed to market. So we have to deal with regulators all around the world. We're regulated in the UK, in Europe. Recently here in Australia, we've got our license in Singapore in application. We expect that to be soon. So we're widely versed in regulators. I think the Australian regulator is actually a really good regulator to deal with. I think probably the most progressive regulator in the world would be the UK. You look at 2008, the financial crisis. They evolved as a regulator then and said, do you know what? Big banks have had it too good for too long. We're going to open up the market and we're going to make it a place where competition can exist, and we make it easy for competition. And that helps to give choice and experience to customers. I think Australia were probably a little bit slower there. They went, big banks are good. We need them for a strong economy. And that worked really well for that economic period. But then I think, more recently you look at the Royal Commission into banking and all that good stuff. They know that they need to foster competition, and they're doing that now. And they've a few years ago opened the sandbox for fintechs, pushing into the open banking space now, which puts the power back in the consumer's hand of who owns their data and who can access their information, which is a really strong piece. And also, there is a piece on debanking and how they can deal with that as well. So they're really starting to push into that space of helping the consumers get more choice, and that can only be a good thing in my mind. So, like I said, we've just got our license here. It was a super quick process. A lot of detail went into it and a lot of preparation to make sure that you stack up well against what they're checking. But yeah, it was a pretty easy process.
Excellent. Somebody asked this earlier. If if there's an area that a market that's underserved here from a fintech perspective, what would you say it is?
I think mortgages are probably an area that is ripe for investment. A lot of them still need a paper trail with wet signatures. And so from my mind, I do think the mortgage sector is an area that will be, that needs disruption, but whether it'll come quick enough.
And from your side, Matt, is there an area that you think is underserved?
It's pretty well covered.
Yeah.
Nothing that...
There's no low-hanging fruit left, is there?
No. We don't... Funnily enough, there's not a lot of... we work across banking, digital lending, point of sale, payments. Those are probably the key sectors. I actually don't see a lot in payments, really, in terms of payments businesses in Australia, which is interesting. But, the digital, in terms of where the most amount of players, I think, is probably in the digital lending space. The one area that probably the biggest growth area for us in the US is receivables-based lending. So, looking at sales data and providing SME, lending facilities off the back of receivables data. And there's not really anyone in Australia that's doing that. That's noticeable, like Uncapped and Chase and Wayflyer. There's Row. Those are all Clearco. Those are all major big fintechs in the US that we're working with, and it doesn't seem to be a lot of players doing that.
Yeah, they're early stage, so Patron, fundable. Yeah, I think, but that's, there's no way it's really kind of mature, I'd say, in that space.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining me, chaps. I guess last word, what would be your words of advice for the people in the room? Should they do it or should they not?
I think one of the key things that I would sort of think about is data residency, especially if you're like a system of record. So making sure you've got a really sophisticated and succinct, response when you come to that, which something that we possibly haven't been in the past, but working on it. Data residency is not really an issue, but everyone, especially in Australia, everyone seems to think it is. So, just having a really clear sort of talk track on that's really important.
Awesome. And Mark, like your last words of advice, would you kind of encourage businesses come and launch in ours, or do you think they need to do a lot more due diligence?
I think, as I said earlier, that making sure you've got product market fit, super important, that your product's going to stick here. But I would do it. I'd get down here and get involved. I think one of the key things I'd say around talent is just another thing is just don't pick up what you have as a employee proposition and just copy it and bring it into Australia, or vice versa. Make sure you're picking up the nuance to the market and not just trying to create a global position, because that won't work. So.
Well, thanks to Codat, Currency Cloud, and the UK Department of International Trade. Thanks for listening, and thanks so much for your support. If you're new to the show, make sure to follow us and leave a review. And you can connect with me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. Until the next episode, stay safe. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We find world-class talent to build world-class fintech ventures, and you can find us at tier1people.com.